Hello out there, this is Bo and Joe. I am Bo.
I'm Joe.
And tonight, we are going to have an interesting discussion.
Okay.
So, Joe, I want to tell you a story.
All right.
John McConnell was a man who was a cop.
Mm.
He retired somewhere around the early 1990s and had a daughter whose name was Doreen. And in 1992, John just happened to be in a store right as it was being robbed at gunpoint. As it turns out, John would try to be helpful and ended up getting shot 6 times.
Oh,
he died. He was shot, amongst these 6 times, one was in his heart, one was in his left lung, and the others were at various locations.
Okay.
So the last thing he had told his daughter Doreen was that he would always be there to take care of her.
Mm-hmm.
5 years after his death, his daughter Doreen had a child of her own, a boy. She named him William. William was born with 2 major defects. He had a divot in his heart, and he had a small, I forget the medical term, but he had a small hole in the left lung.
Oh, wow.
So, as it turns out, when he was 3, his mother was sitting in her study, and he walked in and started going crazy, knocking things off the shelf or whatever.
At 3 years old?
At 3 years old.
Okay.
And she said, "You better be good or I'm going to spank you."
Mm-hmm.
And he turns around and looks at her and says, "When you were a little girl and I was your father, I never hit you, no matter how bad you were." And she was like, "What? What did you just say?" So he asked his mother, a couple of weeks go by, he asked his mother, he says, "Mom, what was that cat we used to have?" And she said, "We've never owned a cat." He said, No, not Maniac, but the other one." And she started thinking about it, and she's like, "Holy crap, Maniac was a cat that I had when I was a girl."
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, yeah, not Maniac, but the other one." And she's like, "How do you know about Maniac?" And he was like, "No, we had 2 cats. We had, my favorite one was the other one, the white one." And she's like, "You mean, Boston?" He's like, "That's it. I used to call him Boss." And she had a breakdown because her father used to call him Boss.
Oh, man. Oh, no. I see where this is heading.
Oh, yeah. So, that is only one of many cases of children who appear to have knowledge that they should not have. Mm-hmm. Children who claim that they are the re-embodiment, or the subject of tonight's conversation, the reincarnation of another person.
Wow.
Surprise.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, man.
Yes.
That's very interesting, though, especially something that connected,
So my first question to you is, do you believe in reincarnation?
Well, that's a very difficult question.
Is it? Isn't it just a yes or no?
Well, no. To me personally, at least, it's not. There's a lot to unravel on that,
Well, tell me.
Because first thing of thought, right? If I just think in relation to physics and just something basic as a physical layer, practical as it were, we are made out of information and energy, right? So, law of conservation of information, right? The second law of thermodynamics. Energy can either be created or destroyed, can be transformed. So that, to me, would say yes, right?
Okay.
It's definitely not just a possibility.
I feel like there's a but coming.
Well, no, it's not a but. It's just, realistically, that, to me, states that, yes, we are going to be transformed. Whether that's reincarnation or not, I don't know. But for sure, it's definitely possible in my mind.
So that is, if you'll forgive me for saying so, but that's kind of a coward's way out.
Well, not
I mean,
cowards.
it seems like it's a yes or no. Do you believe it or not?
So the best way I can answer that is, without taking in theology or religion and strictly thinking in physics, yes.
Okay. So what if I tell you to take in theology?
Okay. Again, more of a charged question. Depends on what you mean, what theology, what beliefs.
No, you brought it up. What did you mean when you said it?
Well, I mean, you think about it, right? There's so many different schools of thought and different theologies that talk about reincarnation, like Hinduism and Buddhism and all these, the middle paths, as it were. And getting towards nirvana. I mean, you're a practicing Buddhist, right? So you know
right.
what I mean.
Yeah, sure.
So that type of thought. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying, personally, I haven't found one in particular which I abide by, like you have. So to me, when I think about this type of stuff, I always think in terms of things I can bear to understand, or I could put in a frame of reference that makes sense to me, which is why I mentioned physics. Not a coward's way out, just a practical way out.
Okay.
To me, it's
maybe
more...
coward was a strong word, but
okay.
It was more or less to provoke you to give me an answer, because I felt like you were being overly not sensitive but protective of yourself.
It's just a difficult question in my mind. It's
I don't think so. I don't think it's difficult at all. It's like when you go outside. For you, if I say the sky is red, if you go outside and you look up, you have a definitive answer.
Absolutely.
So when I say, Joe, do you think that reincarnation is real? I
think it's possible, but I don't know if it's real.
So you haven't made a decision as to whether or not you think it's real or not?
Well, if I was forced to say yes or no, I would say yes.
Then that was the answer.
Right. But if you'd ask me, do I have more leeway of just a yes or no answer, I would say I think it's possible. But I have to really look into it to understand whether or not it's completely true.
So the interesting part about this conversation is, even though you've indicated to our listeners that I am a practicing Buddhist, and
poop.
No, that's totally okay. I don't hide it in any form, but it's also important to let our listeners know that I'm a practitioner only in the mindset of it. I don't believe in the spiritual aspect of it. I believe that their frame of mind, and of course we can have a show at some point, at some date in the future, where we talk about these things more in depth, but I don't believe that we have spiritual elements to us. I don't believe in the afterlife and things like that. I find them fascinating to think about and to talk about, hence this conversation. I myself, I have never experienced anything to lead me to believe in anything spiritual. We've had that conversation personally. So for the folks at home, when he says I'm a practicing Buddhist, what he means is simply that I believe in their philosophy on how a person should act and think. Right. And that's it in literally every element. So
question to you. What about you? Do you believe in it?
No, I don't.
Believe in reincarnation?
I don't, but I find it fascinating that there are so many stories like the one I just told you. And tonight I will give you a few more. Oh. But that's just one that struck me as very interesting. If we take... And of course, this, you have to understand that's all secondhand information. So this is probably coming from the mother or somebody who knew the mother. And anecdotal at best. Okay. Or just a good ghost story at worst. Or maybe just a ghost story at worst.
Well, pretty interesting, though.
But I have also seen people or talked to people who have experienced something they say that they've been through. And of course, to me, that remains anecdotal as well. But I've seen people or talked to people who have had similar experiences. There is a story of a child who was in some sort of accident or had some sort of health issue that happened, and they ended up falling into a coma and being rushed to a hospital. When the doctors did all this work on him, they lost the child for a few moments. Okay. And they did manage to revive the child. When the child finally came conscious again, they looked around and they asked the doctor, "Why is there a shoe out on the ledge?" And everybody thought, "Oh man, brain damage. This is terrible." And the kid sat up and said, "I'm just curious who put the shoe on the ledge." And everybody thought it was weird. Okay. And they opened up the window and looked out, and sure enough, about 30 feet down, there was a shoe sitting on the ledge of the hospital.
Oh my God.
So the child said that later on would go on to say that they were, and I'm going to use a feminine pronoun just for sake of story purposes. She said that when she quote unquote died, that she had was looking down at herself and all the people who were trying to help her, and she flew outside of the hospital and saw the shoe there. Wow. That's how she knew it was there. Now, of course, there are people who will say that she saw it coming in or on a car ride or something, and they're all got some grasp at a potential truth.
It's a really hard thing to see.
It is a really hard thing to see, but it's one of many stories that have made this more of an interesting topic for me. Yeah. Do you have any stories you've heard like that?
Well, I've heard a lot about out-of-body experiences. Apart from out-of-body experiences, there's a lot in conjunction to the belief of the neurochemistry of the brain when you die.
Sure.
And we talked about that.
Yep.
Dimethyltryptamine releases, right?
Sure, yeah.
So it would explain some of the things that people see. To your point, right, to a person that's more of a non-believer in these subjects, and I'm not trying to say, from what you've just said, right?
No, I am clearly the proverbial devil's advocate, yeah.
Right. So, but in the sense, the best way we could scientifically explain something like this would be when you go into this state, there's a massive release of dimethyltryptamine, which is a particularly powerful hallucinogen.
Oh, yeah. Especially if you're like 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, right? The body creates this extremely powerful hallucinogen. It does it in a variety of different ways and shapes, and we would talk about it in a different episode at some point because it's very interesting. But to get to the point, I think that would explain it, because a lot of the times, and half of it, right? You can't explain that shoe, but the fact.
So you're saying that DMT is what causes that child to.
So I'm trying to paraphrase here on a couple of different people that have talked about it. Like Terence McKenna talked about this subject. He was a controversial person, but he wrote a lot about the subject. He wrote the book Food of the Gods that talked about the effects of these types of substances and stuff like that. But in particular to what you mentioned. So the out-of-body experience is not just a feeling like you're escaping from your body, but what they say about the tunnel of light.
Sure.
So
a lot of scientists say that the tunnel of light is literally your brain shutting down, and it's the final firing of neurons and everything. Yeah.
So there's a lot of science behind all that. I am not a neurologist, so I don't claim to know, but if I were to take the devil's advocate or your point of view, I would say that explains some of it, but there's still that not 1% that we can't explain, like especially something like a shoe in a ledge 30 feet down from a hospital building. How can you explain that? So
the interesting part to that is, since you mentioned, and we are kind of segueing a little bit from the
heart of the topic.
Yeah, we've slowly went away from reincarnation to out of body experience.
Oh, my bad.
But I think that there is a slight correlation. They both deal with potential death or afterlife. Mm-hmm. So a good example that I heard is there was a I don't want to say biologist, I think he was a neurosurgeon, who would tell people all the time, when you're going under the knife, understand you'll see nothing. There will be no dreams because we're terminating your brain's ability to function largely so that we can do this operation without causing harm. So during that time, your brain has the same chemical makeup that it does when you are in the process of being dead.
Okay.
And I say of being dead, there's multiple levels to the way a person dies, when brain activity shuts and starts, whatever. Mm-hmm. And he indicated that when you are fully under the anesthesia, it's dreamless. It's dreamless is the best word for it. Mm-hmm. There's no firings of the brain. You're not there. Okay. And he said death is exactly the same thing. From a chemical basis, it's exactly the same thing. Okay. So he said that when you're going through the process, when your brain's going through the process of dying, you get the visions, you get the DMT surge, and it's a way to comfort you, essentially. It's how it's reacting, and that's been known for a long time. So he said he had, I want to say he had a heart attack or something, and he died. He was legally dead for a couple of minutes, and he said that when he was revived, he was a changed man. He said, I was wrong. Like death, when my brain shut down, something to the effect of, I woke up and I was flying. Wow. Not him flying. He said it was a sensation of flying. Oh my God. And he said, I felt like I wasn't me. I was part of a force. And if I recall the story correctly, he said I was part of a force that was moving a butterfly or a swarm of butterflies. Okay. And he said during that time, his brain was dead. No movement whatsoever. He's looked at the EKGs. He's looked at the all of the medical stuff I don't even know the words for. Yeah. He looked at it all and said that during that 5-6 minutes, he was legally dead. No brain activity, nothing. But he has a clear image of what was going on. Wow. And so he's completely changed. He became, I want to say he became quasi-religious after that and changed his theory, his thesis on everything. So that as a back then I was an atheist. I was disenchanted with Christianity and Catholicism, and I had been an atheist for a long time, and that was actually the first story I ever heard that rocked my belief in being an atheist.
Wow.
Because it came from a man of science who had the same thought, same beliefs I did, who had an experience that I didn't, that changed him.
Wow.
And that has always stuck in my mind after hearing that story.
You know, one thing that's very interesting, there's a couple of things to unravel, but particularly the fact of the person feeling like they're part of a whole or something more.
Right.
And then the other side, this reminds me a lot, again, Terence McKenna, when he wrote a couple of books, but that one, Food of the Gods, talks a lot about this, about how hallucinogenic substances, particularly like you can see the modern tests that they're doing on people that have terminally ill diseases.
Right.
They give them dimethyltryptamine, they give them lysergic acid diethylamide or LSD and stuff like that. And after they do this, and we're talking about not just people that are facing their own mortality, right? Or at a greater rate than usual.
Yeah.
But not only that, a lot of them are also atheists. And you know what's funny? After they have these experiences, they say similar things. They say they're no longer worried about death. They have an acceptance of what's to come. They believe that it's not the end. It's a very strange thing. I mean, and again, I'm not trying to segue, but it correlates.
No,
right?
It does correlate. So I want to give you and our listeners another example.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. So I might butcher this, but it's an Indian name, so forgive me if I say this incorrectly. Hanan Mansour. Mm-hmm. And I said Indian, and now I see she was born in Lebanon, so
it's okay.
I'm the butthole.
Hey, at least it's not,
Scottish. Yes, yeah, exactly. It didn't say that she's green, so I got that going for me. But Hanan Mansour was born in Lebanon in the 1920s. Mm-hmm. She had two daughters, Leila and Galata.
Okay.
Her third child was a boy who was born in 1962. And she said she had started the process of dying right as the boy was at some point. I'm terrible at taking notes, so forgive me on that. But she started talking about dying. She believed that she would be reincarnated.
Okay.
18 months later, a baby called Layla. Mm-hmm. The woman did die, and I am terrible at taking notes, apparently. But she did die in, 1962.
Okay.
And 18 months later, a random baby called her daughter Layla, Hanan's daughter, Layla. 18 months later, Layla received a call from a 18-month-old child who said, I want to talk to you, Layla, in broken child English, of course. And she tried to talk to the baby, and the baby kept saying, how is the family? How is everybody? I've been gone for a long time. 13 years later, that baby was able to meet with Layla in person, and now she's 14 and a half or so. When they finally met, the 14-year-old sat down with Layla, who is now obviously substantially older, and said, how is so-and-so? And she listed off every one of Hanan Mansour's relatives. Every one of them. Wow. Asked them how they all were. She was able to name every family member down to the lineage of their father, their mother, their cousins, brothers, uncles. You get the idea.
Oh, my God.
And she was able to tell Layla where her hidden jewels had been.
Okay, wait. So, give me a second.
And like I said, there's a lot to take in because I butchered that story pretty badly.
That's not what I meant. I meant, so when this whole happened, were they in the same place?
No. So Layla was born in a different country.
Yeah. Really? Oh my God, that's even stranger. Wow.
Yeah. Oh no! These aren't even the stranger stories. I've got more for you and our listeners. The ones that I found the most interesting are the ones that I took note of.
Okay.
The hospital one, while not being necessarily reincarnation, I felt like I wanted to share that because I was still blown away by it.
The thing that I cannot take away from it, the haunting element of that is, how did that person know that there's a shoe? I mean, I don't care. It doesn't make sense to me that they were looking at it. I've been to the hospital a bunch of times, and you're not looking at the hospital when you're going to the
usually
hospital.
Pretty worried about something. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that she couldn't have looked up and seen it, right?
Well, but so if I got the story right, it was couple of floors down from where she was. So that means that it was an elevated position. So that means it was more difficult for her to see it if she was coming in from the ground, right?
I honestly don't remember any elements of height or...
Okay, so regardless, it's a very interesting story, and it does, in my mind, have a lot of things to do with what we're talking about. But in relation to that, the fact of having this young kid call you...
So, I'm just curious. What if... both of your parents are still alive, and I'm gonna knock on wood before I say this.
Yeah,
that's wood for our listeners.
Yeah.
If one of your parents were to pass, and you received a call, call it 2 years later, from a boy, let's say he's a Puerto Rican boy, he calls you up and says, "Hey, Joe, have you been taking care of your mom? How are your brothers? How's Maria?"
Wow.
Like, how would you react to that?
At first, I think it was a joke.
Right. I think that's a normal reaction.
I would be in shock.
Maybe a little upset that somebody's potentially playing with you.
It's 2 years, it's a little early. So, first joke, then anger. You're right. Yeah. And then curiosity. I mean, I'd like to know more,
So what if the boy is able to sell you on the idea that he's your father?
Well, in that case, I would like to have a conversation with him.
Right.
When he can talk more, when he have more, not intelligently,
bigger vocabulary.
Exactly. Yeah. When he has more verbose vocabulary, and at that point, I am pretty sure, at least in my side of things, that if I talked to him enough, I would be able to tell whether or not he was lying.
Okay.
And if he was lying, I'd ask him how the heck did he know?
No, that's justifiable. But for this example, what if you can't prove he's lying? What if everything he says is right on the money?
Oh my God.
He knows all your nicknames. He knows your birthdays. He knows, things you guys have done on vacation. What if he has knowledge that nobody else should have and says, "Joe, if you'll forgive my potential bad Star Wars reference, Joe, I am your father." Or in this case, no. I am your father.
You mean no?
I mean no. I am, whole nother conversation. But yes.
So, to be honest, I would ask him, what did he saw?
What did he see?
What did he see? How was the transition?
Yeah.
Did he remember? If he does remember anything. I would have so many questions, honestly. And if he cannot convince me that he's not lying, like you said, I don't know, man. My whole belief structure would change. It would be something that would...
To what?
To the thought...
And that's kind of... And I don't mean to interrupt, but that's kind of what I'm digging at is...
Yeah.
What if this boy convinces you that he is your father? How does your thought process change in regards to everything or anything?
Well, in regards to my belief structure of what happens after we pass, I've always been of the mind of, like I said in the beginning, like energy and information, we're not going to be destroyed. We're just going to be transferred or transformed.
Okay.
But if it's something, and again, this boils back down to physics in my mind, if it's something that we could tie down and then recreate in some way, shape, or form, that to me gives more credence to some of the things like quantum entanglements, things like that. But without going to that level, I think the first thing I'd have is, again, tell me what you saw. Just, if you didn't see anything, then what did you feel? If you didn't feel anything, then what do you remember? And if you can't remember anything, how can you remember everything?
I know. I mean, I totally get it. So there was to lapse into a story that I didn't take notes on, that I remember because of how unusual it was. There was a boy who had never seen an airplane before.
Okay.
And I think you and I have talked about the story at some point way in the past.
Wow, yeah.
And so the boy had never seen an airplane, and his parents took him to an air show.
Oh, yeah.
And you remember this?
Yeah.
And the boy went nuts, totally loved every bit of it.
Yeah.
And there was a section where they were showing off airplanes, and the boy walked up and was pointing at various parts of the engine and correctly naming the part. And the parents were blown away.
Very young, right?
And super young, like under 10 for sure.
Yeah.
And the pilot, the guy who owned the airplane, came around and was like, "Oh, so you guys work with him on planes?" And they're like, "No, he's never seen it." And he's like, "These guys are messing with me, yeah." And so the boy was able to name every part of the plane engine, and then hopped in and was able to start the plane and correctly, in the correct order.
Wow.
And of course, there were some elements he couldn't reach, so he just pointed at him. He was able to walk through the process to correctly start the plane and had never seen a plane up close in his day in his life. Then at some point, there was shortly after that, he started talking to his parents about the day he died.
Yeah.
And that really made them feel really bad because they thought he was just having nightmares. Mm-hmm. Well, then he started talking about, no, it's not now. It's from my last time I was alive.
Wow.
When I crashed onto a boat. Mm-hmm. Or no, I lifted off from a boat, I'm sorry, and I crashed into the ocean or something to that effect.
A pilot.
And he would wake up and he'd be having this dream of drowning.
Wow, he had post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, well, something to that effect. And his parents, they didn't know what to think, but he, after one particular night, he woke up and after this nightmare, and he turned around and he said, "My name is," and he gave him his name. And they looked it up, and sure enough, there was a pilot with that name off of the same boat that he mentioned, who had gone up, I don't know, the war or the fight or whatever. And I'm sure I'm screwing up some of these details, but the story itself is the merit. So he gave his name, they looked it up, and they did in fact find out there was a pilot with that name on that ship who died in the same way he was having a dream of. So my first thought was, as I was writing up some notes for this conversation, my first thought was, maybe this isn't reincarnation at all.
Okay.
Maybe this is children touching the Akashic record and not knowing how to interpret it.
I see that's a very good point.
So no, I'm curious.
Oh, man.
What do you think?
Wait a minute, you just blew half of my mind. Give me a second to take this in. No, you're right. That's a very good point, Charles. That is a very, very good point. You're right. If you think about it, not just Akashic record, but in general, if it's somebody tapping into a memory that doesn't reside to them, but they just can't tap into it, yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Does it?
Because think about it, right? I mean, information. Back to what we were originally talking about.
Right.
You can't destroy it. So, if it's there, it's in the ether, as it were, right? The Akash. And for whatever reason, you're in a state where you can actually be attuned to it, or you can understand it, or it flows, or it vibrates at whatever particular frequency that you're vibrating at, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. I mean, I'm not trying to take away from the whole reincarnation thing, but that's a very good idea.
No, I'm just curious. I mean, a child would not know how to interpret that they have touched into the ether, if you will. Yeah. Not that I don't know that an adult would either, but I should hope that they would have a better grasp on it. Mm-hmm. Not that they've how to do it, but that they have that something is wrong or different. But a child might easily, if they were to touch such a thing, and again, this is assuming the Akashic record is a thing. Yeah. If a child was somehow able to touch said record, I don't see how something with such power wouldn't overpower an undeveloped mind.
Exactly.
With that in mind, I'm going to take you to our next story.
Oh, snap.
Oh, yeah. Because that's a great conversation.
Yeah.
But this next example challenges that even further. Kendra Carter lived in Florida. Okay. When she was 4, her mom took her to swimming lessons. And again, they're living in Florida. When they got to meet their swimming instructor for the first time, Kendra dropped all of her gear, ran at this woman she'd never seen before, and hugged her in tears. And like a very particular kind of relationship. Hugged her, was screaming for her, was kissing her and everything. And the woman was taken aback, like, what the? It's a very friendly child. When the instructor, whose name was Ginger, when the instructor knelt down to talk to her, and was like, well, you're very affectionate. And she goes, of course I am. You were my mom. And she said, what? And what are you talking about? She goes, you were going to be my mom.
We're going to be?
You were going to be, but you changed your mind. And Ginger, the instructor, had an abortion 9 years ago. So Kendra said, I was in your tummy, and you changed your mind. You didn't want to be my mom.
Wow.
But she said this whole time, I've been missing you.
Oh my God. Oh my God, Charles.
So there was
are you sure this is a story? You're not trying to convince me?
No, this is, I mean, it might be a story from somebody, not real, but So,
my God, though, that's profound, man.
Ginger and Kendra's mother would go on to have a severe disagreement about multiple things. Mm-hmm. And so, Kendra was separated from Ginger for, an extended amount of time. Yeah. And Kendra's mother started seeing the girl deteriorate physically. She was not eating. She was losing weight. She was weak. She was not focused. Mm-hmm. And she was going through what is, textbook depression. Yeah. So on a whim, the mother made up with Ginger, said, can we meet one more time and let Kendra talk to you? From the moment Kendra saw her, instant, immediate health.
Oh, my God.
So that would seem to say... I know, right? This is where we challenge ourselves.
Yeah.
So if we assume, and why wouldn't we? Because we're having this discussion. We're talking about hypothetical or intangible elements. Yeah. So we have to assume that the story is real. And if that's the case, how does that modify the Akashic record theory we were just mentioning? Mm-hmm. How do you... That almost seems to... Now, when it comes to abortion, there's a whole nother show we could do on that alone. Yeah. And I promise our listeners we will get to some more serious elements at some point. Yeah. But we have a lot more fun things to talk about right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, of course, we want to get everybody, to like us before we make you hate us.
Borderline right now.
I know, right? Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, you're doing good, kid. But no, so the question is... If you are a person who is anti-abortion, you say that it's murder. Right. All right. Fetus is a living thing, and I'm only going to touch on this for this example. I'm not trying to have this philosophical conversation. Mm-hmm. But if you are anti-abortion and you say the fetus has a soul, then this story is right up your alley. Yep. But if you're the other way and you say no, it's not a soul till it's born, or it's not a person until it's born,
or it's the fourth trimester,
or something like that, then this story is a kick in the balls.
Yeah, absolutely.
Proverbially speaking, of course. Yeah. But so the question is, what do you think? Well, now that you've heard this story, what is your thought process?
Oh man, that's a very, very, very loaded question. First thing I gotta say is, if I was the person that was a relation akin to that woman, I would automatically that
woman, which one? Kendra's mom, or abortion. So Ginger. Yeah. So if you were her or somebody in her family, you'd be surprised.
My mind would just, I don't know what to say. At first, again, it would be like the stages of grief. Like I would first be in shock and denial, and then I would be surprised and angry, and it would be a very difficult thing to take in. But after taking it in, I don't know what I'd do. I mean, I'd feel like a terrible person if it was me that actually made that decision. But there's a lot to take into why you made such decisions,
of course.
But the part that we're talking about is more interesting in the sense of, apart from feelings, what would that mean? What would be the connection that makes it so that it retains some type of element of memory? Like that to me is much more interesting than what I would feel. Like how would you remember if you were a fetus? Or how would you even know that you're looking at the same person? Because and you get what I mean, right? Like if you're talking about the other story, it was a grown-up who had this intensely passionate relationship with the plane because that was his job, that was his passion. He did that every day. But with something like this, you're talking about an unborn baby. So that in my mind is a much more interesting and profound question. How did that baby know? How did that fetus even understand when she saw that mom, that you're my mom? That's in and of itself is a completely different question.
Well, I mean, so there's a biological connection, obviously.
Yeah.
And any mother who is worth her salt can tell you that they tend to have a psychic sensation when their child is doing something bad. Okay. It's like it's too quiet. That's an obvious clue, but that's not what I'm talking about. Like my mom, when she was here, God rest her soul, if you believe in such things, then she would often come running out of the house to whoop my ass because I was doing something bad, and I know there were no windows. Yeah. And how did she know? And the truth is, sometimes parents just know. Okay. Like there's, especially mothers. Fathers are really not as in tune with their children typically. And that's not a dig on anybody. It's just, typically speaking, the father is not as in tune with the children.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. It's inside you.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
But you're right. I mean, there's definitely a deeper connection there. And to me, that would be the much more interesting question, apart from the feelings that I would feel. I would be like, my God, not only did I let this person down, but look at the connection that I completely removed, But there's a lot to unravel on that, man. But
there
what
is.
about,
there is.
So the same question you asked me, in the sense of something very peculiar, you're a person that has a particular set of beliefs. What would it do to you if somebody would convince you?
So
something like that.
You're talking about the previous example or this example?
The previous example, I think, is more in conjunction to our own lives. Because for me personally, I couldn't even imagine to be a mom.
I have one parent that is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
The other one has been dead for 20 years, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But if I, to be honest, as a child, I remember thinking that my mother was going to be, she was so spiritually strong that she would be the one that would come back and like slap me when I was asleep or something and be like, I told you I was coming back, or you didn't clean your room, or something like that.
Yeah.
But I never saw anything. And that surprised me. That honestly surprised me. I expected to have a message, a sign, a feeling, a sensation.
Mm-hmm.
I got none of that. But I should think that the funny thing is I did get a call on my cell phone a week after she, or maybe a month or so after she died. I don't remember the exact time frame, but it was close.
Mm-hmm.
And there was somebody who was looking for Debbie, and Debbie's my mother.
Oh.
Or was my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm sorry, but she passed away a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get this number? And she was like, no, Debbie, you know Debbie, right? And I was like, I do, but who is this?
Mm-hmm.
And the line went dead.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was weird.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, to me, it seemed like somebody was trying to get in touch with her family to ask about it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, nobody had my number. I'd just gotten the phone.
Wow.
So, I don't believe in coincidence, right?
Yeah.
But not that answers your question, but I wanted to build off of that. What if that somebody had called me and said, hey, I'm... we have to fast forward to a point where the child can talk.
Let's say it's an 8-year-old kid.
An 8-year-old kid, a female, calls me up and says, "Hey, I'm your mom, and what's going on with your family? I don't know everybody else's number or whatever."
Yeah.
Then I would have 3 questions.
Yeah.
Just 3 questions for that child that would identify them beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are my mother reincarnated, and if that child could answer all of those correctly, the thing that would happen first off is I think I would be ecstatic. Mm-hmm. That the person, that kindred spirit, is now here again, and I can talk to them. Even though it would look weird, talking to an 8-year-old out on the street and people are like, wow, that's not the kind of image you want,
No, but I understand. Yeah.
So,
what else?
That would be amazing to have that person back in my life.
Of course.
As far as to my belief system...
That's what I'm interested in.
Right. So, fortunately, my belief system, being a practicing Buddhist only in the mindset, I have no predilections towards how I have to feel, or how or have to is a bad choice of word, but how I feel like I should have to feel, or how I feel like I should have to act.
More fluid, I guess.
Yeah, I'm alive now. At some point in the future, I won't be. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, the only thing I care about from a sense of life and afterlife is, did I leave the people who are here, who mean something to me, did I leave them with a good feeling? Yeah. Did I make them feel like they spent time with me and they enjoyed it? I enriched their life. Right. If I've done that, then I end this life on a high note. And I think that's all. And again, this is just me.
Right.
I think that's all a person can really ask for.
Yeah.
There are people who I look at, and I'm going to segue just a moment, but there are people I look at and I'm envious of because of their station in life. Mm-hmm. People like Bill Gates or Elon Musk or, Warren Buffett, people who have all of this money and never actually have to work anymore or can do anything they want to do, can do things for their family. Mm-hmm. I wish I could do that. Because I always said if I won the lottery, I'd buy everybody a car. Everybody who's special to me.
Right.
And I I stand by that, really. I think a car is again, segueing, a car is something that I think a lot of people could use. And I think if I did nothing else for you, if I gave you a car, then I would feel better about myself, because that's a tangible thing that's going to make your life easier for years to come.
Yeah.
And that's going to make me feel really good.
Right. But I mean, in a sense, I guess the better question would be, how would your mind change about life after death? Since this would be evidence, right? So
I've been thinking about it.
You know, like if it was be proof, like those 3 questions are answered, and you have constant conversations, you feel ecstatic, you'd be at the state, but then you'd have to question, wow, so there is a possibility, of course, that there is some type of life. I mean, what would that do to your whole framework?
Nothing. I don't think the fact that, and not fact, but I don't think the idea of reincarnation gets me off of being a good person.
No, that's not what I meant.
I understand. It wouldn't change. What I'm saying is it wouldn't change me at all.
Okay.
Because this is the life I know now.
Yeah.
And maybe the person who got reincarnated, maybe my mother in this example, maybe she did something to deserve it. Maybe I haven't.
Oh, I see what you mean. So the karma aspect.
Not really karma, more like there's an old Arabic saying that's plan for the worst but hope for the best. And it's my thought process isn't exactly like that, but I'm just going to be what I think I'm expected to be.
Right.
And that's a good person, that's a kind person, whatever. If at the end I stand before a creator who says, you didn't believe in me, so you kind of screwed up, well, then I can look at said being and say, well, I did the best I could with what I had.
Yeah.
And I can do so. If I go to hell for it, then fine. Then I did what I could do.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a great subject that I think is super deep.
Yeah.
And we can definitely put that off for another podcast. But I think I would have to hear what my mother, the reincarnated mother in this example, I would want to hear what she said. Like you said, what did you see?
Yeah.
So that's going to segue to our next story.
Yes, please.
So Diane Williams, she was somewhere in the 70s. She had a grandmother whose name was Nanny White.
Okay.
She died in 1974.
Okay.
3 children later, Diane Williams had a daughter named Kelly.
Okay.
Well, Kelly seemed to know stories of Diane's childhood and of Diane's mother's children, and she was able to correctly identify how Diane enjoyed wearing her hair, her clothes, the kind of music she listened to, and that she was obsessed with Cleopatra. Now, the girl was 3 years old.
Oh, my God.
3. And she knew about Cleopatra.
Yeah.
She knew about, we'll call it some seedier elements of life in the 60s and 70s at 3.
And in the 70s, right?
You're right.
Okay, no internet.
And, well, exactly, no internet, and no phone, well, no real phones.
Right.
No cell phones, I mean. The girl, at 3 years old, she'd sit down at a couch, and she would always set her handbag, and as a kid, she carried around handbags. She'd always set it to her right between her leg and a chair leg. And that was something that the grandmother always did.
Wow.
And again, the grandmother passed away before this child was even born. She started using phrases that were out of fashion. You know, things like whippersnapper. I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. It's not one of the words. She started using phrases that had gone out of fashion. And then she started talking to her mother about the house that her mother used to live in.
Wow.
Back when she was a kid. She was able to talk about all the furniture, the styles, the music, and everything. Then she also talked about, this is a 3-year-old, talked about a city that was nearby that got destroyed during World War II. This is in England.
Wow.
And she was talking about, the 3-year-old talks about how the destruction of that city made her and the people around her feel.
Wow.
So, in a world where the internet is not present.
Right.
So, in a world where that is not the case, at 3 years old, she can't read.
Yeah.
You know, she's not on a cell phone, obviously.
Yep.
She's not likely to take that much detail from memoirs, even if she could read. So there's a lot of elements of that story. And again, if we take it at face value, and we have to for the discussion, then what does that tell you?
Habits. Even the habits. That's even
the habits.
stranger.
Exactly.
That's the part
exactly.
out of everything. Don't get me wrong. It's a very peculiar situation, but that habit of of the chair with the purse thing, that blew me away, man. I mean, that's one thing that if you think about it, right, that's everybody's got their own, weird, habits. Like, and that
I don't have any weird habits.
Well, you'd be surprised.
No.
You don't notice them, right? But maybe something.
I mean,
does.
yeah, no, I'm just totally kidding. I'm sure I'm full of weird habits.
But in my mind, right, that's extremely peculiar, man. Like, doing that habit as a 3-year-old,
Yeah.
That to me kind of nails it down to more than just the fact that all that information is not accessible. Just the fact that you can't mimic something that you never saw. And even if you did see it in a picture or two, you wouldn't automatically do it every single time as a habit.
Right.
That is a very peculiar situation.
So we're coming up on the close of the hour, and I wanted to...
Dang, really?
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
It's a great conversation. It's a great subject for us to be able to... It's something that, well, I think most of our conversations could, but deserves more than an hour.
Oh, yeah.
So I did some research, and I was thinking, well, how can you tell if you've been reincarnated?
Oh, no. I was going to ask you about that.
Well, no, I came prepared. I know how you think. Because you don't have any habits or anything.
No, sure I don't. Oh, my God, man.
So, our producer just asked me a question about reincarnation, and that is, do those children in these examples, do they feel like they are the person? And the answer is no. They don't feel like they are that person. They know they are that person.
Wow.
So there's no doubt in that 3-year-old's mind that she is that person living in a new body.
Oh my God.
And in all of these examples, every one of them believed and was able to maintain an intellectual conversation about their old psyche in this new body. And to me, and I'm just spitballing this, mind you, but if I was to die today and in 2 years I was resurrected into the body of suddenly I become conscious at 18 months old, my first thing is, I am mad. Like, I'm mad as hell. Why did I die? Like, I hope technology's better. I hope that doctors are smarter. Like, and then when my parents come out and they're like, "You're a little son of a bitch," and I'm like, well, I'm like 90, so I'm your elder. I know, right? It's like, all right, look, mom and dad, that's creepy AF, because somewhere 2-3 generations down the way, past millennial, they're gonna get a really irate baby who's just like, I would never got to finish that game, and it's gonna be hell to pay.
Yeah.
But so. Signs of reincarnation. I was curious. How can you tell if you've been reincarnated? The easy answer that I saw from a lot of people is that you have been. Just deal with it. Your whatever iteration you are now is like version 9,000, 900,000.
Oh wow.
So they say here's some things you can think about that might indicate you've been reincarnated or what you were reincarnated from.
Right.
So the first one is dreams. If you consistently have dreams about a particular time period, or particular location, or particular face, then the likelihood there's a chance that your dreams are remembering not traumatic but important things in your life.
Right.
And if you think of the case of the woman who was alive at World War II, obviously that's something that she would remember.
Of course.
So that could be something pointing back to that. There's a thing of science that says your brain, when you see people's face, most of us take snapshots even if we don't realize it. There are some people who are what they call face blind, which is amazing. They can't tell your face from her face.
Oh my God.
And it's really difficult for them to go through life.
Oh my God.
That's a whole different story. So the theory is that if you have dreams about the recurring things, maybe you've been reincarnated and that was a part of your previous life.
Okay.
Then there's scars. There was a scientist who tested more than 2,500 people. I can't remember the word where they put you under and they got the little medallion.
Oh,
hypnotized. There you go. Yeah. So he hypnotized under hypnosis.
Yeah.
More than 35% of these people were able to do regression therapy and say that they had a previous life, and for these people who did, almost every one of them had a scar or a birthmark in the location of where there was some trauma.
Wow.
So one example was a boy who said in his previous life he was shot in the head, on the right side of his head, by a shotgun.
Oh my God.
Well, the boy was born with a slightly underdeveloped right side of his face, and his ear never fully developed. Mm-hmm. So there's his story is given a little more credence for doubters because of that. Mm-hmm. Number 3, deja vu.
Oh.
Deja vu is something I want to talk about in another podcast because I'm fascinated by it.
Okay.
I get deja vu probably once a week. Oh, wow. When I was a kid, I got it probably once every 2 or 3 days.
Oh my God.
And when I had a job a few years back where I was working in a call center, mm-hmm. and I was just typing and talking to a buddy next to me, and I kind of freaked out and kind of looked out into space. I was like, oh no. And I had goosebumps all over me, and he was a young black guy, and he was like, what's wrong? And I looked at him and I said, I don't really like lavender. I think vanilla is a better scent. And he was like, what? And I said, purple, red, black. And he's like, you're freaking me out, dude. What are you talking about? Right then, 3 girls walked by, and they said, yeah, I don't really like the scent of lavender. I think vanilla is much better. I've never seen a black guy go white before, but he was the closest I had ever seen. And they were wearing, like, black, purple. I called their shirts out. He actually stopped talking to me for a while after that and called me a witch and a bunch of stuff. But that, I know people have said deja vu is when things happen before your brain can process it. It kind of photo snaps it or whatever and then tries to process. That example for me, that one I just told you, that really happened. And that is, to me, that completely debunks the thought that deja vu is just a feeling of misprocedure.
I agree with you, man.
So I get deja vu all the time. Even my current wife, sometimes I'll get a feeling of deja vu, mm-hmm. and I'll look at her and I'll say something, and she'll be like, I was just about to tell you that.
Wow. And
so that does happen.
That's borderline premonition, man.
It is borderline premonition, but it's I don't know if I'd call that Akashic, touching or nothing like that. I don't believe in psychics either.
That's not what I meant. I mean, if we go down that rabbit hole, at some point we have to in another
at some point.
But that would, in my mind, give credence to the many worlds theory. If you think about it, you might have a specific type of, let's say, sensitivity to a particular frequency that we cannot observe.
It's interesting.
But whenever that happens, you might just be tapping into another point in time in another universe. And maybe that's why you're remembering something that hasn't happened yet. I think that to me makes more sense than premonition.
Well, I don't know. I think that's a great topic for later. I said, I think deja vu can be blown up. But deja vu, that's another thing that not scientists, but researchers say mm-hmm. could potentially, maybe you have lived something similar and you're just recalling it. Natural gifts. This is another one. Have you ever met somebody who can just do something with no practice, like play a piano just right off the rip? Right. My sister got a lot of quirks about her, but one of her abilities is that from the moment we put a music keyboard in front of her, she was able to do music. Wow. Never read it, never self-taught, just happened.
Wow, like a prodigy.
Yeah, and so the thought is that people who have natural gifts like that, that's not, we know that some of that is hereditary. Mm-hmm. But what happens when your whole family, none of you have played piano, and then suddenly your son, boom, comes out and knows he's a grand piano player? Yeah. So there's a thought that you said information doesn't die, so maybe you bring elements of your former life into your new life. Yeah. And then finally, phobia. Oh. Phobias are, like, for example, people have tremendous fear of drowning. Yeah. Well, there's a good chance, according to these people, you probably, in one of your previous lives, you drowned. Yeah. Obviously that's a very traumatic thing, so...
That's a very good point.
It's just an interesting thought process, but we find ourselves at the end of the hour. Dang it. I'm curious for you. I would like to hear you give me a summary of what this has given you. What kind of thought process do you have now?
Oh, man. Question a lot of my beliefs, first and foremost. More than anything, it kind of revels me at the belief of, if this is a true thing, what could that mean for not just me, for everybody that I've lost, everybody that I've known? Where could they be?
Right.
And if not here and now, maybe in the future. And how does this stem in time? That's the biggest question. Because we mostly talk about things that come from the past to the future, but what about the other way around?
Yeah, that's a little harder to do, obviously.
Yeah.
And there's not many babies who go, you know what, I'm going to be born in 80 years.
No, but you know what I mean? Like, in regards to the past, memories of the past, but what about memories from the future?
Well, I think they call that psychic, right?
No. I mean, if you were born, let's say you, Charles, born today, and you have memories of a world where you'd have technologies that we have not invented yet.
So I think the caveat to that is people who come out, babies who come out and say, I'm from the past, that's going to be more easy to prove than if you're a baby and you go, dude, I was in the future.
Yeah, you should invest in this company.
Yeah, I know, where we have flying cars, they're going to be like, wow, you're really daydreaming.
Yeah.
So, but you know, one of the things I did forget to tell you, since you had mentioned it, and I wanted to make sure I touched on it, in at least two of the examples that I gave you, when asked, what did you see? What did you experience? At least two of the examples said, well, there was a tunnel. I followed the tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel was peace. And there was a man there who I talked to who I didn't have a name for.
Oh, wow.
And in every case, the children had been raised as Judeo-Christian, so they called him Jesus. Okay. But they acknowledged it. He was a man who talked to me, who made me realize that this is the cycle of life.
Wow.
That you live, you die, you go to essentially another plane of existence.
The boatman.
And, well, there's no boatman. It's literally, there's a tunnel.
Archetype, yeah.
So, yeah, the boatman, I see what you mean now. But so they go to the other side, and this man talks to him and says, this is what we have, this is what things are. And then at some point, he said, these people have said, you get a choice. You can stay or you can go back. And I find that fascinating.
Wow.
But we are out of time.
Oh, man.
So I hope for our listeners at home, I hope you took something out of this. I hope it makes you think. Hopefully it's thought-provoking.
Oh, yeah. It evoked the mind, of course, man. That was great.
Well, great. By all means, if you guys have any questions or comments for us, feel free to email us. We are at boandjoe@gmail.com. Any questions or suggestions for future shows, feel free to hit us up. But that's us for the night. Signing off, this is Bo.
This is Joe.
Have a good one.